I remember rightly.
Yeah, it was over a year ago, wasn't it? It was yeah.
Before
So it's
COVID.
been.
Before COVID. We'll have to have a note.
I know.
BC.
Yeah,
BC,
BC.
definitely.
We're
What
going-
a different world it seemed then. It seems like a lot longer than a year, I have to say.
Yeah, so I mean, you, as I say, you organise the speakers for Astrofest, do you not? So it's something you haven't been able to do. You know, I mean, it's
No, that's right. Yeah, so I organise it with Stephen Young
Yeah.
and Lucy Green, and so we're just getting together a program for online now. So we'll run through the year. We did the landing of Perseverance with some special guests, and we've got a really good evening about stellar astrophysics coming up next a week on Thursday.
Yeah,
It's going to be a lot of fun. So
that'd be interesting.
Astrofest has gone worldwide this year. So
Yeah, well, it's about in some ways this new Zoom world has kind of opened up doors that we didn't think that it would open. You know, like I did a talk the other night for a group of astronomers in Venezuela, of all places, but I had to have a translator, which is
yeah. So there's in everything, there's pros and cons. You know, we can just get on and find the good in what we can do and make the most of it.
Yeah. I mean, when you speak to Stephen next, give him my best. You know, we haven't seen each other for a long time.
We will do that music panel. I promise you that, Pete.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to that. It's going to be brilliant.
Me too. Yes.
We'll get there. We'll get there. So, Stuart, what we do tonight is we do a Meet the Astronomer section here on Astro Radio, and you're the guest tonight, as you know. So what I'm going to do is ask you the inevitable questions, and then if you don't mind, I'll open it up to the panel to let them ask you a few questions as well.
Fantastic.
But one of the first questions I'm going to ask you is the obvious question. You're a musician, as I know, and an astronomer. But what sparked your interest in astronomy and astrophysics and cosmology in the first place?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, actually, because I don't have a eureka moment to describe. I've just always been fascinated by the sky and the stars. And the older I got, the more my sort of interest developed. So there was never a point when I thought to myself, I am going to be an astronomer, or wow, that's cool, or anything like that. It just somehow seemed a natural thing. So just being so interested in it, and then I suppose at some stage I realized that there was a career to be had as an astronomer, and I sort of naturally kind of fell into it.
Yeah. So your music side of it, where did that come in?
So it's really interesting that you should ask that, because you know, it's a lot of time to think in lockdown. And so, you know, I've been doing quite a lot of sort of thinking on putting things in perspective. And whilst there's never a single moment in which I remember being sort of turned on to the stars or anything like that, there was a key moment I have realized in my life, which will sound bizarre in a way and trivial. But it was being 10 years old and going to the cinema and seeing Star Wars for the first time. And that blew my mind. It was everything I loved all there in one package. And a huge part of that was the music as well. It's so natural to me now to sort of look up into a dark, starry sky and sort of hear some kind of big orchestral fanfare. I can vividly remember sort of sitting in the cinema, and when the spaceships would take off, you know, from Tatooine or wherever, and suddenly the cinema would be plunged into darkness and just the beautiful stars on the screen and this big swell of orchestral music. I mean, that was totally it. And it was around about 10 years old as well that I discovered my love of the sound of electric guitar, and that was it. So the big orchestral sort of music that the John Williams soundtrack was sort of my gateway into the romantic composers and the Russian composers. And at the same time, electric guitar was really exciting me. So anything that blended huge, big orchestral ambition and electric guitars was going to be a total winner for me.
So one of the things you've done is Beneath the Night on BBC Radio 3. Can you tell the listener a little bit about Beneath the Night and what this project was?
Yeah, sure. It was me getting old. I mean, that's what it was. And I thought to myself, it was this question: why have I always loved the stars? What is it about them that has gripped me so completely that there was never anything else I could have done, with my life? And I've met so many people like yourselves and the listeners when I go out to talk at conventions and societies and things like that, that every time I walk into one of those rooms with a society, I just feel instantly at home with all these kindred spirits. And so I wanted to try to understand what it was. And so I started looking back to other astronomers and other people that had written about their love of the stars. And, Johannes Kepler wrote about it really eloquently. He said, we don't ask the reason why the songbird sings. That's just in its nature. And so we shouldn't ask the reason why we're interested in astronomy, because it's just in our nature. It's there, it's beautiful. Pythagoras, Plato, they wrote about this. And I swiftly discovered that actually I ran out of written sources. This fascination that humans have had with the stars has gone on since before history. And so I started to trace it in other ways with sort of cave paintings and artifacts and things like that. And gradually it just sort of developed in me that, I'm not special in this love of the night sky. It's something that runs through us deeply. And I realized as well that, when I look at the night sky, I'm going through the same emotional reaction that anyone else who's ever lived and looked at the night sky has gone through as well. It's a way to empathize with every human that's every sighted human that's ever lived. And so I decided to start to try and organize my thoughts. And the first thing to do was I put it into that 5-part radio series, Beneath the Night, which was a follow-up really to the Music of the Spheres, which I'd done a couple of years before for Radio 3 as well, another 5-part series. And then I wrote it all up into this book, Beneath the Night, as well, just to trace the way our culture is entirely interwoven with our love of the night sky. And it's one of the defining traits of being a human being.
It is. And I mean, that's, well, I do the Herschel to Hawkwind talk. And, that's kind of skips through from Stone Age up to present day, just skips, doesn't follow any particular pattern. I won't say too much because Simon's booked me to do it at the Herschel Museum, so I'm not going to say too much. But it just skips through different aspects of this. And one of the things I was hoping to do last year, well, the year before last, was to do that at Herstmonceux. And Sandra booked me to do it at Herstmonceux, but obviously that got cancelled because of COVID. But I hope when we do get it to do it again, I shall be asking you to come and guest on guitar.
Yeah, we were talking, weren't we, about putting an astro super group together. If
this
I could
is right.
Use that word. Yeah, no,
yeah, we could do it. We could do it.
There. I'm totally there.
You can play 3 chords. You can play Hawkwind. So it's going to be
three and a half.
I'll grab my Marshall out of the shed. I'm kind of all in the box now. I just do everything through the computer. But if we're gonna do it, I'll go and get the Marshall stack back out.
I've got Dr. Megan Argo from she was at Jodrell Bank at UCLan now. She's interested as well. So
she's super cool.
Yeah, so we could be a cool band. We could be a cool band. We just need a drummer.
Nick Shamonic.
Yeah, you did suggest him. astrophotographer Nick.
Yeah. I've played in bands with him for a long time. So,
Excellent. There we go. We got the makings of a supergroup now.
Do you need any roadies?
Definitely.
Yeah, but we can't pay them. It's the
That's
usual
okay.
music.
Just to be close to you. Just to be close.
Can I play keyboards?
Yeah, there we go.
There we are.
I love this quote. The Independent placed you alongside Stephen Hawking and the Astronomer Royal, Sir Martin Rees, as one of the stars of British astrophysics teaching. So do you do a lot of outreach?
Yeah, that's sort of my thing, really. I love communicating astronomy, and it's a two-way street. I love learning about everyone's interest in astronomy as well, what fascinates them, what questions they have. And so in a sense, I suppose virtually my entire career has been outreach. So I left the University of Hertfordshire in 2001 now, so 20 years ago. And I went to work for the European Space Agency in their communications department. And so it's all about the communication, because I think it's so fascinating, and people are interested in it. And sometimes I think that the astronomers that are doing the work are kind of it's their day-to-day living, and I totally get that. But there's a little bit sometimes that they lose the wonder of what they're doing. They're chasing grants, they're writing computer codes, they're all of that. And it's wonderful to talk to them and really pull their enthusiasm back out of them, so I can write articles about them and what they do. So yeah, it's pretty much all outreach, really.
And you've written for several publications such as Sky and Telescope, obviously Astronomy Now, and the Times Higher Education Supplement. I mean, reading your biography, how do you find any spare hours in the day?
Oh, you see these bags under my eyes. Yeah. But whatever you love, you just do, and you don't think about the time involved, and that's just what I love.
So what university are you attached to now?
I'm a visiting fellow at the University of Hertfordshire, and that's where I did my original degree, which was astronomy with physics. That was my bachelor's. And then I did my PhD in astrophysics there. And the lovely people have just given me a DSc for services to astronomy and a public understanding of science. So that's very kind of them. We're waiting for COVID to finish up so that we can have the awards ceremony, and I can go and be a double doctor. So
double doctor. There you go. You just get picked. Go on.
I was going to say, I think professor is out of my league because I'm not in academia anymore. So
we'll give you the honorary title of professor tonight in the chat area here. Tonight we have Professor Stuart Clark with us. I'm going to open up for questions. I'm going to open it up for questions from the panel, if you don't mind, Stuart.
No, please carry on.
Away you go, Andy. Any questions?
Yeah, Stuart, what you were saying earlier about how our whole civilization is intertwined with the stars. What happens to our civilization when people can no longer see the night sky? That's a
super good question, Andy, and that's something that I grappled with quite a lot, because I didn't want to write a book that ended up saying everything is terrible. No. Neither did I want to not present that if that were the facts of the matter. And what I came to realize was that without question, we are losing our view of the night sky.
Yeah, definitely.
That goes without saying. But in a kind of compensatory move, we are seeing more images of the universe on a day-to-day basis than ever before.
True. Yeah.
And so what is happening is this huge rise in astrotourism, because that one thing of just seeing all these amazing images is driving a desire to see the night sky with your own eyes, to go to dark sites, to see the aurora, to see eclipses and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a tremendous shame, that we're losing our view of the night sky because of urban living.
Yeah.
But if you accept that as just where we are in civilization at the moment, there are, the way we associate with the night sky is changing, and it's changing through our robotic envoys, our space probes and things like that we send, and any internet that we distribute these images. So, and as I looked back through history, our view and our interpretation of the night sky has always changed. We've always been in a process of seeing things slightly differently. The big one was the invention of the telescope.
Yes.
Where suddenly everything was just so different. The night sky was not what you thought it was. There were things that were hidden up there, and we take that for granted now. But that was a huge crisis moment for the interpretation of the meaning of the night sky.
Sure. Sure.
And also how we think of the night sky as well. We used to think of it as a completely remote realm, something that was in quotes heavenly, made of a completely different substance from the earth, a place we would never touch until perhaps death. And then after the scientific revolution and the work of Newton and other people like that, we started to see it as a physical realm, somewhere that was a place of the same laws as here on Earth, the same matter as here on Earth. And gradually that's evolved into, now we think of it as a place that we will go. There's just no question sort of about that in people's minds. It is a destination now. And seeing the pictures from Mars and from Voyager and from Hubble just reinforce that idea that it's a tangible physical place that will one day be the wider home of humankind.
And of course, over the next decade, there's going to be an explosion in the amount of astronomical data, with all the new generation of telescopes like the LSST, the ELT, all of these coming online within the next decade. James Webb, if all goes well, there's going to be an absolute explosion of astronomy. And I remember reading 15 years ago that what we know about the universe is doubling every 10 years. And the next decade, that pace is going to accelerate so much in the era of big data and all the rest of it, that, you're right, it will be an opportunity for people like you and like me who do a lot of outreach to get out there and say, well, you can't see the night sky, but here's where you can find the images, the information. Whether you're a beginner or an expert, this is where you can go to find it, and hope that enthuses people to get involved with it.
Yes, and I think that will drive people, to seek out dark skies, and to look for them. Because, of course, as we all know, once you have stood under a truly dark sky, you will never look back from that. No. You will remember that moment forever, because of the feelings that it gives you, that awestruck, sense of this huge universe around you that you are somehow a part of, and that you're here and you can see it, and it's just mind-blowing.
And it's quite primal as well, I think.
It's absolutely. And I think that was the thing that made me realize, as that feeling happens to me, that's that feeling that happens to everybody. So whoever the cave artist was in Lascaux 19,000 years ago that drew the bull in there, and then appears for all the world to have marked the Hyades and the Pleiades just above its shoulder. When I stand there and look, at Taurus, and I imagine a bull, I'm going through the same thought process that person did 19,000 years ago. And I find that
It's amazing.
mind-blowing.
It's such a connection, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's what unifies us more than anything else, in fact, isn't it?
Absolutely right, Andy. And that was, again, once I started to realize these things in a concrete form and sort of almost write them down in sentences and see them in black and white, I knew I had to both write this book and do that radio series about it.
Well, the very best of luck with the book, Stuart. I hope it's a major success for you.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Thank you.
But Daz,
Stuart, in the past, you've spoken of, and following from the theme of how things have developed and all that, of when we had what we call the Enlightenment, that's basically for the common people, or the people who, dare I say it, the astrologers and things like that. You call it the Great Disenchantment. Can you speak a bit more about that, please?
Yes, I can, because this was another one of those big shocks to me as I was researching Beneath the Night. And, you know, it takes a little bit of thinking about, because we've all been brought up in a scientific world. But before that moment of the Enlightenment, the astrology of the time, that was all constructed to give a unified idea of why we were at the center of this massive universe, that the universe around us seemed to go through cycles the same way that the Earth does. So our seasons appear to be in lockstep with the constellations that appear in the night sky. Obviously, we understand that now because of the orbit of the Earth. There were other things as well. You know, if you go back to the Egyptians, Sirius would rise in the summer, in the hottest part of the summer. And they devised this idea that, that's the hottest part of the summer, because not only do we have the sun, but we also have this really bright star Sirius shining at us. And Sirius being in Canis Major, that's, you know, the dog star. That's why we have our saying today, the dog days of summer, meaning the hottest days of summer. It's because in ancient Egypt, in those hot summer months, Sirius was above the horizon. And all of these ideas about how we were linked to the wider universe, with astrology starting as a type of meteorology, in fact, to try and explain weather, and then becoming a kind of thing to try and explain personalities and medicine as well. You were supposed to, you know, all the physicians, medieval physicians, they would carry almanacs so they could look up the positions of the planets in the constellations. The zodiacal constellations were all mapped onto the human body. And it was those charts where the planets were in those constellations compared to where the person was feeling pain or hurting. Once you compared and correlated all of that, those charts told you where to do the bleeding, to cut people, to try and heal them. So for the common people and everyone really, there was a whole unifying theory of everything. This was how it was, as above, so below, and all these correlations. When science comes along and says, actually, we can't prove any of that, and a lot of that is just hearsay, it's hindsight, all those kinds of things. Let's just believe what we can see for sure and what's demonstrably true, what we can prove with observations or experiments. That whole system collapses. And that means that everyone's worldview collapses. Everything, just imagine everything you think you know about the universe and the world and how it works and why we're here, is you're just told that's wrong. And the only people that say they do know what's right are this minuscule elite of the natural philosophers. And so it was Max Weber, or Weber, the German philosopher in the 20th century, who called the Enlightenment the disenchantment. He said that's the moment at which it all collapses and just becomes about facts and figures, and the ordinary person is lost because they have no feeling of enchantment, that things are being looked after in some way. And we've gradually sort of pulled ourselves out of that. And I think it is outreach that has allowed us to do that. So in the later 18th and then the 19th centuries, where you start to see science communicators serve a real function and have a real role, they can take all those facts and figures and measurements and make them interesting and exciting, and just talk about the wonder of the universe, for the general public, the people that aren't as deeply into the maths and the calculations as everybody else. And in doing that, you kind of give the enchantment back. You can now say, this is an amazing fact. I can see behind you Io. What an amazing place, extraordinary volcanoes, the most volcanically active body in the solar system. Start telling that story in the correct way, and people become enchanted by the true wonder of the universe.
Yes, thank you for that. That's nice. Yeah. Just moving on just slightly, what do you think, or what would you like the next big discovery to be?
It's almost invariably whatever I'm writing an article on at the moment. But in this case, I'm really excited about it. Primordial black holes. I mean, this is mind-blowing to me, actually, at the moment. I'd heard about these little black holes that get formed supposedly in the Big Bang, and they kind of like hang around, and perhaps you see them because one explodes through Hawking radiation and all the rest of it. The state of the art now about the theoretical investigation of these primordial black holes is so much more advanced. So there's supposedly a whole continuum of masses of primordial black holes, from things approximately the size, or the mass rather, of asteroids like Eros, all the way up to dozens of solar masses, and all scales in between. And this population of black holes was forming continuously through the events of the Big Bang. And so where you get key moments, like the creation of matter, the baryogenesis, for example, or the splitting of the forces of nature, like when the electromagnetic force diverged from the weak nuclear force, these provide moments of enhancement where more black holes can form. So if we can find this population today and measure them statistically, we will see where those key moments in the Big Bang took place. A whole window of that will open up. And it's just possible that we have one in our solar system, because people are looking at the moment and seeing these alignments of the Kuiper Belt objects and thinking there's a planet 9 out there. But it's possible that that's a primordial black hole. It's just as likely as it being a planet at this stage. And if it is, a primordial black hole of, say, 5 Earth masses or so, that corresponds to roughly the time when the electromagnetic force separated from the weak nuclear force. But also, even though it's sort of 200, 500 astronomical units away, that's still within the realms of sending a spacecraft to it. So we could get to a black hole if it truly is one, and that's still a stretch, I totally acknowledge. But this I think is where the real excitement is. I would love to see primordial black holes discovered.
But detecting them is going to be exceptionally difficult, because the only way you can really detect them is through microlensing events. And they did I can't remember which group it was, but there was one group who did a microlensing survey of M31 last year. Quite an extensive survey, and they detected one event which could possibly have been a primordial black hole. So the surveys seem to indicate that either we got the masses of these wrong and they actually have less mass and are thus more difficult to detect, or they're not there. So
yeah, and the Ogle survey, you know, between 2015 and 2010 and 2015, you know, they get about 2,600 microlensing events,
Right.
6 of which are ultra short.
Oh,
So
really?
they're either 6 of which are ultra short. So they're either free floating planets or primordial black holes. The other thing to say about that as well is that we may have already detected them. LIGO may be detecting them all the time, because those black holes that are colliding and giving the gravitational wave detections, they're like a couple of dozen solar masses. And they're really hard to explain how you've got those.
Yes, true.
But if they're primordial, they're really easy to explain. You can't say for definite they're primordial, of course, because they could just be the mergers of lots of stellar black holes.
Yes.
So but LIGO will get to the sensitivity in the next few years of being able to detect things that black holes that are less than 1.4 solar masses. And if it does that, if it finds those, then they have to be primordial, because there's no way you can form them in stellar explosions. And then the field opens up.
I think we're hoping for a big increase in sensitivity with the current upgrade.
Yes,
so when it comes back online next year, it'll be really interesting to see what they achieve with it.
Yeah, so all my fingers are crossed at the moment.
And my legs, yeah. But for totally different reasons.
Just one more, Stuart. On your past books, you tend to write from a witness's perspective, of somebody who's witnessing, especially when you're talking about the past greats of astronomy, you know, Galileo and all that sort of like Kepler and things like that. You tend to write as a contemporary, a witness at the time. What was the thinking behind you taking this angle?
Yeah, that was that came about quite naturally through a discussion with publishers. And at the time that those books are the Sky's Dark Labyrinth trilogy, and there's the first one, the Sky's Dark Labyrinth, which was about Galileo and Kepler. Then there was the Sensorium of God, which was Isaac Newton and Edmund Halley and Robert Hooke. And then there was The Day Without Yesterday, which was Albert Einstein and Georges Lemaitre. And each of those names were used by those characters to describe the universe. Galileo called the universe Sky's Dark Labyrinth. That's a slight paraphrase. Newton called the universe the Sensorium of God. And then Lemaitre called the Big Bang, in fact, he called that The Day Without Yesterday. And it came about because there were a couple of trends in publishing at that time. One was for biographical fiction. So biographies, you know, if you read 2 different biographies of Galileo, you can easily come away thinking you've read about 2 different people. So there was a sort of a feeling that if you fictionalized their life story, you weren't really doing that much of an injustice to it, you know, because every author, even in the biographies, puts their own stamp and their own interpretations on things. So there's a little bit of a trend to do biographical fiction. And it came about quite naturally in conversations with an editor that had been reading about these great rivalries and all the rest of it, and just said, you just couldn't make this stuff up. You know, it is novelistic in that way. You know, there's so much interesting things happening. And the other thing that fascinated me about the project was that we are completely you know, we hear about Kepler's laws. So it's one of the first things you get taught, you know, in astronomy, Kepler's laws of planetary motion. And that makes them sound thoroughly modern, you know, because they just work, they just are true. And yet the time in which he came up with those laws was so very different from our own. And so by dramatizing them and putting some of the biographical information in and the sort of context of the time, I could show how these thoroughly modern ideas germinate in completely historic times. And so that was the nature of that that project. And it also got me to, I mean, all the major book and literature fiction festivals. So I ended up talking to audiences who were not intrinsically interested in astronomy and science, and it gave me a whole different perspective on what they look for. In those books, I was writing more about scientists and their motivations rather than explaining the universe, as it were. So that's how they came about.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Simon?
I love a bit of outreach myself. And there's a few moments when I've been doing it where I've just stopped, and I've just been thoroughly sort of shaken to the core with just the moment that's just happened, and it's just a wow factor in it. And I wondered if you've got a few of those moments from your career in outreach that you'd like to share with us, where you just gone, wow, I've done something.
Gosh, yeah, it's interesting. What I have a few. One of the things that used to fascinate me about taking general public groups around the observatory at the university is that I noticed that if you had something like Saturn in the eyepiece, that was a guaranteed wow moment for anyone who hadn't seen that before. They were going to remember that forever. And one of the most interesting things was, apart from some sort of verbalization, lots and lots of people would look through the eyepiece, see something amazing, and instantly look up as if shocked, and sort of look along the tube of the telescope, look out the dome, almost like, God, have I been tricked or something like that? It was, and it became quite a common thing to see this, people's astonishment, and then sort of looking outside of the telescope to see if they could still see it or something like that. So that was a rather lovely little thing that I noticed.
I think we all do it though, don't we? Because I remember I was out with my scope one night and I just happened to be pointing straight at an iridium flare.
Wow.
So I just got this blinding flash of light in the eyepiece. Of course, the first thing you do is pull away from the eyepiece and look up and say, what just happened?
Yeah. When Richard Carrington in the 19th century saw the solar flare for the first time, he's sketching, he's got a projected view of the sun, and he's sketching sunspots, and a brilliant bead, two brilliant beads of white light appear on the image, and that's the white light flare going off.
Yeah.
And the first thing he did, and I've always thought this was really, really clever, is he jiggled the telescope to watch the image move, because he thought to himself, if that's a stray reflection from somewhere off the telescope,
clever,
it'll move across the image.
Yeah,
It'll go one way, the image will go the other. But of course it didn't. They just stayed completely locked together. So he knew it was coming from the sun.
Amazing.
Speaking of the sun, that was another one of my really interesting memories. I was on the beach in Turkey for the total eclipse, whenever that was. And I wasn't with a group of astronomers at all. I was just with locals who were fascinated by what was going on. And I remember the eclipse got to the end, and the diamond ring happened, which is still, I think, my most breathtaking part of the eclipse. It's what a thing to see. And I remember this chap behind me. He literally just shouted at the top of his voice, "Oh my God!" And I know exactly what you feel. I just, it was another one of those little empathy moments. So those are the big memories that I have of
I shall
outreach.
look forward to that when I see my first total eclipse, because I've never actually seen one. I was in Falmouth for 1999 and we were completely clouded out. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
we have one.
snap.
We have one here in Spain in 2026,
Ah,
which is about. It's going to be about 5 hours south of me. So I'm definitely going to make that one, all being well. But you know, I've got, at my time of life, I just have to see one. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not going to shuffle off this mortal coil without seeing one. Definitely, I'm just not going to permit it.
Stuart, can I just ask you? You mentioned you saw Star Wars when you were younger, and that sort of caught your interest as well. Do you see science fiction as a positive relative, if you like, of astronomy? I mean, does it help to bring people's interest into astronomy as well as science fiction for its own right, for instance?
I think it does. I mean, not for everybody,
Mm.
but I think it does. I don't think there's anything very bad comes out of science fiction. You know, I'm very well aware, and I think it's really interesting that something like Michael Crichton's Andromeda Strain, you know, that came about. You know, that was a disaster movie about bringing something back to Earth, about the space program. You know, bringing something back to Earth, and it came about in that sort of era of arguments about whether Apollo was worth it, whether the space program was worth it, and those kinds of things. But I've never seen a conflict between the two.
Yeah.
I've always been clearly able to separate what's fact from what's fiction, and I love sort of playing in space as well as the reality of it.
And a lot of science fiction fans aren't interested in astronomy at all.
No,
you know,
no,
so
they're looking at it for different reasons.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
We were talking earlier about the effect that this deep link with the night sky has on cultures. I don't know if you're familiar with the short story Nightfall by Asimov. I don't know if you read that.
A very long time ago, yeah.
Which is exactly the opposite, that there's a planet in a multiple star system where it never gets dark. But once every couple of thousand years, people will see the night sky for the first time, and it drives them mad.
Yes.
And they blame the astronomers. And there's this lovely image in the short story of people with flaming torches marching on the observatory to destroy it, because they think it's all the astronomers' fault. And the sight of the night sky drives them mad for the first time. And a wonderful story, haunting story, has never left me.
Yeah. I remember that denouement, you know, of it, definitely. And Joseph Campbell, do you remember Joseph Campbell?
Yes,
wrote,
yes, indeed.
The Secret Agent, which was based on a real event. Someone did try to go and bomb the Royal Observatory.
Really?
Yes, that is a real event that it's based on, because they thought astronomy was just the pinnacle of privilege, just useless privilege. You're spending your time wondering about the night sky and the wider universe when there's so much wrong on the Earth.
The gentlemen astronomers.
Yeah.
Wow, I never knew that. Oh, thank you for that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, we're not gentlemen.
Well, you speak for yourself, Daz.
So, Stuart, do you have a telescope that you use personally on any times that you do get free? And what do you like to look at?
Yeah, so I do not have a telescope. I know, yeah. Look, that's it. End of transmission. I was just pulling the plug.
God, you're just like Pete. God,
yeah, exactly.
But I look with the naked eye. I've developed an absolute love and fascination of ranging around, you know, with the naked eye. So when I was at the university, you know, I mean, I used those telescopes there all the time. I absolutely loved it. You know, that sort of my formative years as an astronomer, if you like, was sort of spent in the observatories at the University of Hertfordshire.
But do you have any? You use binoculars or anything like that to help you?
Occasionally, I will use binoculars, and then when I was invited to write the Guardian's weekly column, their Star Watch column, we sort of talked about it a lot, and there was like a very traditional way that it had been done. And Alan Pickup had, I mean, what a champ. He had done it for decades and just brilliantly. And I was quite daunted actually about taking over from Alan. But he had just done the traditional, these are the constellations that are up, these are the planets, these are, you know, the things to look out for and all the rest of it. And I said, well, I think it's changing for people now. We're all in this urban living environment. Not so many of us have dark skies anymore. What about if I just did one thing every week instead of a larger column every month? And what if I did the one thing that you should look for with your naked eye this week, and try to do it on the brighter objects, so that even if you're in a city, you know, you can go and find a little park or just in the back garden or something like that, hopefully, and be able to see it. And so I sort of like parlayed my interest in naked eye astronomy, you know, into that. One day I will, I know I will get a telescope again, and I'll have an observatory again. But at the moment, all my spare cash goes on guitars.
And why not?
Yeah.
I see you have an interest in cooking.
I love
What's
cooking.
your speciality?
Well, eating it afterwards.
Why? Because nobody else will.
That's my cunning plan. Yes,
Yeah.
for big portions. I love doing a curry. I absolutely, you know, just
Good man,
love
good
it.
man. Can't beat that.
I know, and you kind of get in the zone, and you can be in the kitchen for in a couple of hours on a Saturday afternoon, just getting everything prepared, listening to some music. I mean, yeah, I like a nice risotto at the end of a busy day as well, because I can just sort of stir for half an hour and just calm right down. So,
so where did you get your knowledge of cooking from? Did somebody teach you, or did you just read up on it?
Just read up really. And a very good friend of mine who is a fantastic cook, actually, he said the book that really started him on it was Nigel Slater's Appetite.
Right.
And I got a copy of that, and I saw exactly what he meant, because it's just about basic tastes and basic things that go together. And it's very simple recipes in there. But you do them and you think, wow, that really works. And so in that way that, you know, a musician gets taught scales. And you just go, oh, I don't want to play scales. I want to actually play something. And then suddenly at some point it all just falls together, and you realize that scales are the basis of everything. And then what you're trying to do just makes sense. So this Nigel Slater book, Appetite, by just pairing up different sort of flavor combinations, makes you realize what works together. So it allows you to go to other recipes and know why you're doing what you're doing and things like that. But I mean, I'm not a brilliant cook. I just I'm not.
But you love
I'm
it.
not going on MasterChef at any time soon. Believe me.
No, but what you have done, you've just talked yourself into being the backstage cook for the gigs. You know, I've been listening quite intently there, and I do like a curry, I have to say.
All right. Well, I tell you what, Pete, you get somebody to change my guitar strings for you.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
I will make a curry, because if there's one job I hate, it's changing guitar strings.
Oh, I don't mind that. I
don't mind that either. I'll do that for a free curry. Do that any night.
There we go.
Fantastic. This is good.
Our guitarist that was with Anubis, Simon Lees, he used to he'd clean his guitar neck, and he'd have that fast fret on it, and he'd do everything in his power to make his strings last as long as possible, so he didn't have to change them. But Stuart, with all this Starlink regalia that's going, what do you think of this Starlink thing? Have you got any thoughts about it at all?
Yeah, my thoughts are evolving. you know, and in fact, at the Astrofest meeting today, we're just putting together a whole sort of evening and a panel about it, so that we can sort of talk about it and get the reaction from people at, say, the Vera Rubin Observatory, how they're going to deal with it and things like that. So inevitably, I mean, there's a part of me that goes, it's so sad, you know, that we're in danger of losing this view of the night sky that everyone else has had throughout all history, if we're not careful. And then there's another part of me that sort of has to say, well, yeah, okay, but astronomers are not the only people now interested in space. Inevitably, our interest in space, the development of technology, rocketry, is getting to a point at which people see opportunities to make money, and businesses and services that can make life better for people on Earth. So astronomers, so in this kind of pragmatic, slightly sad way, I kind of feel we are not the only stakeholders anymore. And that now is the time, we can clearly see the danger coming. So now is the time to talk to these people, to find out how we can compromise, all work together, mitigate these effects, and look forward, hopefully, to a time when we don't need all those satellites up there. There'll be another technology that will do it faster and cheaper and easier, and that eventually they'll all come down. But it's definitely something that I think is of our moment. It's completely of our time, and we mustn't let that moment go. We must engage with SpaceX and the people that are going to put these mega constellations up there, which I know they're open to as well, because Robert Massey at the Royal Astronomical Society has had conversations with them. Some changes already have been made to the satellites, which I applaud, but it's time to have the conversation. And for me, it's an extension of environmental sustainability. Yes. So as we have discussions about how to sensibly and sustainably use the natural resources on the Earth, let's treat the night sky and the worlds of the solar system as another environment and a sustainable resource that we want to be very careful about how we use.
I see that a group of astronomers has started talks at the UN to try and formulate some international legislation, because there are at least another 3 of these mega constellations planned that I know of. Jeff Bezos of Amazon says he wants to build one when he manages to get a rocket into orbit, that is. And also the Chinese said they wanted to launch an even bigger constellation than SpaceX's. All of them are going to be in fairly low Earth orbit, and all of them will have really adverse effects on particularly survey astronomy, like the Vera Rubin Observatory.
Absolutely.
And having read ESO's report about what can be done to mitigate the effect of these satellites, they have some solutions, and they say, you know, it will affect some types of observing at certain times of the day and certain times of the night. But of course, this is only with the SpaceX constellation. Once there's 2, 3, 4 of them, it'll be virtually impossible to mitigate the effects, unless there is legislation to say, right, these satellites have to be made of these materials. They have to have an albedo of maximum this much and what have you. But what you said earlier, I mean, I'm crucified on this program for saying it, but I've always been in favor of Starlink, because it you know, it will bring internet to people who've either never had it before or have terribly slow or non-existent internet. And it's all very well for us to say, oh no, they shouldn't do it, but you know, so many people are being left behind in terms of a stake in their future because they don't have connectivity in you know, rural parts of the world, and they are excluded from participating in so much. And if this is the technology that will enable them to have more say over their own future, then I think it's a good thing.
And this is the you're absolutely right, Andy, that this is the conversation that we have to have. We have to, as a society and as a whole world, we have to have a conversation about what our priorities are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it might be that we have to sacrifice some of that night sky for the sake of equality, and that may be the way we have to go.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the problem is at the moment, though, from what customers that are trying to give internet access to, it's beyond their affordability to have the internet access they're trying to provide them.
It's certainly not a simple solution.
No.
It's a complex problem, and I think once again that's why the discussions at the very highest levels, like the United Nations, to get some legislation, to regulations, all of those kinds of things. And now is the time that it absolutely has to happen. And the other point about this is that since Sputnik 1 to now, there's been about 10,000 launches. Between now and 10 years' time, there's scheduled or plans for 50,000.
Wow.
There's a 5-fold increase in the next decade compared to everything that's been launched, since the beginning of the space age. That is not sustainable in anyone's book.
No.
And it also brings with it that if you do it wrong, the space debris danger that you have, is enormous. You could be losing orbits through collisions and space debris like that. So we absolutely have to get on top of this.
Definitely do.
Absolutely.
The other question I'm going to ask you, Stuart, is if obviously we're going to be having probes going out to sort of the icy moons of Jupiter and the icy moons of Saturn, what do you think we'll find there?
Well, a nice living cell would be sort of top of my list.
Yeah.
So so we can have a proper look at it, see if it's DNA or if it's something different. I mean, I suppose my hope is that it's something different, that there's another genetic material, because then that proves that you can have different origin of life events, and I think that then increases hugely the potential for life elsewhere. But I think this is the astrobiological aspects of those missions are the ones that I'm truly excited by. We've seen this extraordinary sort of sequence in history where we just find ourselves less and less important, where we are in the universe. And yet still the only thing where we appear to be preeminent is in life. And so to try to see if life is common elsewhere and knock us again down another level of significance to just being sort of average things in an average place, in an average galaxy in the universe, that's a clear goal for me.
It was interesting. My grandson, he's not long qualified as a zoologist, and he said to me, Granddad, he said, I wish I was born 100 years in the future. He said, I could have been an astrozoologist.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hope so.
Yeah,
outside the box, excellent.
Yeah, the pace of the pace of discovery may still make that happen for him.
Yeah,
my money is on Enceladus. Well, possibly Europa as well, but I think it's going to be a lot more difficult to get at the evidence.
I think that's right. I mean, what a gift Enceladus is! It's just throwing it into space for us.
I know.
Just throw that question out to John Zarnecki, and he'll say Titan every time.
You're a Titan fan.
Well, maybe Titan.
Oh, I am.
But there was that astrobiologist who came up with a computer model of an organism that could exist on Titan using very cold liquid hydrocarbons instead of water as a solvent, and he seemed to think it was viable. So who knows?
Oh, I just want to welcome Dave back into the chat.
Dave.
He's a little bit
Thank
late.
you. My apologies for being late. My mum did send a sick note in, and I've been busy at the Liverpool Astronautical Society committee meeting, sorting business out, and it was getting heavy with policies for it's important policies for child protection, and not only the children, but anybody with any difficulties, including protecting the members and protecting the trustees of the society as well. So heavy business. So David, I'm here for fun.
Have you got any questions for Stuart while he's here?
Well, I did. First of all, say hi, Dr. Stuart, I think is the correct term.
Yeah.
But I'll call you Stuart if you're off work tonight. That'd be great.
We're calling him Professor tonight, just for tonight.
Okay, Professor. One thing I was trying to check up on your bio as we do, and you got quite a detailed bio. The one I've got goes back a good way, and I'm actually amazed the number of books that you've been involved with. You know, obviously that's the thing that you've been doing, but it particularly of interest, and I'm going to have to read it because I've not had time to check up my facts. Basically, you produced a trilogy, and it sounds fascinating because I'm thinking of Dr. Alan Chapman. When he gives lectures, it's warts and all. So when he talks about Robert Hooke, when he talks about Isaac Newton, these people aren't really nice people. You know, the bit of skullduggery going back in the days, Flamsteed and so on. And I always think of the origin of GMT and the clocks. As it was, great stories back there. But I was just thinking, the first book in the trilogy, The Sky's Dark Labyrinth, tells the stories of the lives and works of Galileo and Kepler against the backdrop of the extraordinary times in which they lived. And then you go on to your second part, The Sensorium of God. And it talks about the life and times of Isaac Newton and also Christopher Wren, Edmund Halley, Robert Hooke. Your third part of the trilogy, The Day Without Yesterday, and that is the achievements of Albert Einstein and a Belgian priest I've not heard of, George. You have to pronounce this correctly for me, George
Lemaitre.
Lemaitre. So some great ideas there. So it's a bit of fiction, it's a bit of fact, with a little touch of fiction with an occasional character thrown in.
Yeah. So
these are books I've got to get a copy of these.
Oh, please do.
Yeah. That sounded rather desperate.
Times are hard, Dave.
Yeah.
The George Lemaitre, what an amazing character. So, I mean, he understood relativity. He's one of the first people to understand it. He came to England to study with Arthur Eddington, who was also one of the very first people to understand relativity. And Lemaitre worked out that the universe could not be static, that if Einstein's equations were true, then the universe either had to be expanding or contracting, but it couldn't stay still, like Einstein had tried to fudge his equations to make everything seem static. And Lemaitre then went out to America, and he ended up working with Edwin Hubble. And he was principally involved in, he was at Harvard first, then he went out to the West Coast to where Hubble was. And Lemaitre was always asking, how can we check this? How can we check whether the universe is expanding or not? He wrote a paper predicting that the universe would be expanding, and he published it in Belgium. He sent a copy of the paper to his old mentor, Arthur Eddington, for publication in monthly notices of the Royal Astronomical Society. And Eddington, for whatever reason, didn't take it very seriously, didn't get it translated, didn't publish it in English. So this was sort of 1924-ish. So this is predating Edwin Hubble's discovery of the expanding universe. But Hubble must have known of Lemaitre's work because Lemaitre worked with him. And yet in Hubble's paper, he doesn't mention Lemaitre at all.
What are you suggesting there, maybe?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm suggesting. I am suggesting that the NASA Space Telescope should have at least been called the Hubble Lemaitre Space Telescope.
It's got a nice ring to it as well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So I think it's changing now. People are starting to realize the extraordinary contribution that Lemaitre had. He also predicted the Big Bang. We spoke very briefly about this earlier, Dave, just before you came in, because the day without yesterday was Lemaitre's name for the what we now call the Big Bang. He suggested that whole idea. Radioactivity had just been discovered. And so everyone was very interested in radioactive decay. And Lemaitre realized that if the universe was expanding today, it must have been smaller in the past. And so he said, well, how small? Perhaps everything we see around us today was once in, some super dense primeval atom. And that was the moment when everything began. Space began, time began. And if so, that means that there was once a day without yesterday, a moment of beginning for time. And he suggested that it was perhaps a radioactive process that started splitting that atom. And then the universe sprang from that. Now, we couch it in very different terms nowadays, but that was just his... that was his mindset at the time.
Are you aware how that was accepted at the time? It's a crazy concept, isn't it? Obviously you've got to back it up with the facts and so on.
Yeah, exactly. And it wasn't very well accepted. In fact, the whole idea of a beginning of the universe was worked very hard against. And it was only the discovery of the cosmic microwave background radiation that showed that the universe had been in a hot, dense state earlier in its existence that gave credence to that. And in one of those, we were talking earlier as well about why write those as novels. And I said it's because when you look at it, there's so much happens that you just couldn't make it up. It's so amazing. And in one of those instances, the confirmation of the cosmic microwave background radiation, the swing of thought now towards the Big Bang, and the sort of vindication of Lemaitre's ideas of a day without yesterday all happened, and he knew about it while he was on his deathbed. His students would come in and tell him about this amazing new discovery. So he knew just before he passed that his ideas were right and proven with observations as well.
So many pass without see the fruition of their work. It's great to see that he did.
Didn't Lemaitre approach Einstein with his findings in Paris?
Yes, he did.
It's a beautiful story as well.
They met in a park, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right. Lemaitre was in the park.
Lemaitre was so much in awe of Einstein. He was absolutely terrified about, even mentioning these things to Einstein. But Einstein
the afternoon together
really well.
Yeah, he told him that his mathematics was impeccable, but his physics was abominable.
That's right. Yes.
So Lemaitre had not been invited to this conference. It was one of the Solvay conferences, and you had to be like you had to be seen to be the very best to be invited to this. And so Lemaitre literally waited outside the door for Einstein to walk out and to say, I've got a theory of the universe. Now, how many times has that happened to us as astronomers? Someone's come up to us and gone, I've got this really neat theory of the universe. Yeah. Well, Lemaitre did it and was proven right as well.
It's amazing.
It is fascinating. I just got to also ask about another book, because you've written so many, and I mean, I'm talking going back to 2009, right up to date. And I think Daz has been checking on what your latest books are, so I'd leave that for Daz to chat about. But I want to ask about the Sun Kings, because the book it talks about a powerful solar explosion that hit the Earth in 1859, and it's the picture of the Victorians, how they witnessed the event. Now, am I right in saying it's the Carrington event?
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
The Carrington event.
The nearest I think I've seen to a Carrington event, effects that hit Canada and basically knocked the power off, and satellites were going out of control. You know, they basically shutting down because we didn't have any warning system. But now we've got those satellites way out there, which will detect the incoming coronal mass ejection. So it'd be fascinating to read that. And I've got to be honest and say I've missed out on these. So I promised to buy at least the Sun Kings, and I'm fascinated by the idea of the trilogy as well.
Fantastic. The Sun Kings was such a special book for me.
Yeah.
Because I just remember as an undergraduate being told that Richard Carrington discovered solar flares. He saw this, you know, white light flare one day in his observatory. And literally in that classroom, in that moment, I just remember thinking, what must that feel like? What must it feel like to see something, you know, that no one's ever seen before, and have that sort of moment? And so I started researching it, and lo and behold, I mean, goodness me, it just turned into, just the more I discovered about it, the more extraordinary it was, you know, that it was just this enormous event. It must be the aurora that was sparked by that flare. They covered at least 2/3 of the night sky on the planet Earth.
Wow. Yeah.
You know, so it has to be the most widely observed astronomical phenomenon in all history.
Yeah.
You know, the eclipses are on tiny little tracks.
That's right. You've got to be, most of it's over the oceans as well.
Yeah. And yet this southern and northern hemispheres, and it lasted for longer than a day, so we could have a whole diurnal rotation of the Earth. So every country, or many countries, and the people in it saw it, and that was one of the things that unfolded. In fact, I can see, Dave, that you've got the RAS library.
I was just going to briefly mention, as a fellow, you must have sat in this very room.
A lot of the research for the Sun Kings was done in that room.
But isn't it amazing to sit there and actually read the actual books and read the handwritten notes?
Yeah.
Of
absolutely.
You know,
yeah, they have Richard Carrington's handwritten notebooks in the archive. So I would go there, and Peter Hingley, who was the librarian,
I remember
at the time,
Peter very well.
Oh yeah,
you know,
Peter,
he would get those out for me, and we would go through them. And like every great librarian, I would email him the day before I was coming down with what I wanted to look at, and based on my research. And I would arrive in the library the day after, and there on the table would be the pile of things that I've asked for. And next to it would be Peter Hingley's pile of all the things I actually needed to see.
Yes.
Based on what I'd asked.
Peter was amazing. Great
based
librarian.
on what I'd asked for. And just, I mean, everything just opened up for me. That whole
we requested, I visited that myself, and a couple of members from the Liverpool AS attended, and obviously we'd got to know Peter quite well over the years, and we requested the works that William Lassell, or Lassell, I should say, had been working on it, because he was a brewer in Liverpool back in his time. But what was fascinating was these handwritten notes. There's stains where he's had his tea mug or his coffee mug or maybe his pint of beer or whatever it was. You can see the stains on his paperwork. He was that tight. I think it's fair to say he was that tight with the old let's not waste anything. He actually was quite a good thinker, really. He used every piece of paper that he could, old scrap notes and everything. He'd turn it upside down, use the other side, turn it upside down, write it upside down, and so on. So he would not waste paper, and then he'd have it all bound together. And it's just amazing to actually hold these. So we were lucky, because at that time, Peter said, we requested these items, and these are originals. And we thought we're going to have gloves on, a face mask, and a decontamination suits as we're used to these days. And he said, "Oh no!" He said people tend to cause more damage by being very careful. Whereas if you've got just using your bare hands, you're just going to tear it. You're just going to turn the pages naturally, rather than being too careful and cautious. So you're actually turning the pages of Isaac Newton, Robert Hooke, Lassell, so on, so on. And it's actually amazing. I've talked about this. I get carried away at times, I know. But if I walk down Matthew Street in Liverpool, I'm walking down the very streets that the Beatles walked down. I'm a big Beatles fan. If I walk down Mather Avenue, I know Brian Epstein was there, and John Lennon must have come into that gate, and so on, so on. And it's not just that. If you walk through the Tower of London, kings and queens have gone through these very footsteps, and you look at the footsteps on castles, and they're all worn away in this lovely arc because of all the footsteps of 100, 400, 500 years of history.
Yeah.
Well, I do that when I go for my walks in the village here. We've got a castle for those,
of course,
in the village. And I often go and the other day I just stood in what would have been the kitchen in the castle. The castle grounds go back to Saxon times and even before. But I stood in what would have been and just stood there for about half an hour just thinking, who was in here? What were they thinking? Right. What were they looking at? What were they doing? What were their lives like? Just stood there for it was. I just love drifting back into time.
Well, this is what it's about. I was lucky to go to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Yeah. And I had to climb them steps and basically walk up them steps that Galileo possibly climbed up. The security did object when I took the cannonball up and threw it off the side at the top. They weren't happy about that, but you've got to have a go, haven't you?
And talking of going back in time, guys, if you look in the chat window, I've posted a photo of what Stuart mentioned earlier, but one of the Solvay conferences, this one from 1927, and it's a colorized photo, so you can see who was there in 1927. Cool. And it really is a who's who of world science. It's amazing.
But that's it. And in the RAS, in the library, you've got to think of who sat in that room, who walked through the doorway. Because they were
one of the things that I did for my research when I was writing the Sensorium of God was to go into the city and to go to Exchange Alley and all those places in there, because it was in the coffee shops, in those really tight little alleyways and there, that Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren and Edmund Halley had their conversation about orbits and the inverse square law of gravity, the very conversation that made Edmund Halley go to Cambridge to seek out who was then the reclusive mathematician Isaac Newton, and persuade him to look at this problem, which is what led eventually to the Principia and changed the world forever.
I worked in the City of London for several years, and my father worked for 30 odd years before me, and I just love finding those little alleys and those little old places that that you don't know unless you really go exploring, and you can imagine shops. But just general meeting places where people are old pubs, and
I'm just trying to remember, Andy, sorry.
No, go on, Dave.
I was just going to say, I'm trying to remember who the astronomer, and it's totally gone out of my head, in Prague. You got the
Tycho.
Tycho
Brahe.
Yeah, now his house is just down the side street.
Yeah,
and
Kepler's house is just down the side street.
Yeah. I was walking
down
the
gravestones as well.
I was walking down just past the Black Light Museum in Prague, because I used to do quite a lot of work in Prague, and I just looked up and there was the Kepler Museum. And and he lived in that house, and I thought, that's fantastic. And it's more or less by appointment only, and I never managed to quite get it together to go in there, mixing it with work. But I will go back, and it's just the things that you just you just happen to look up and see, and you think, well.
But the thing is, the majority of tourists, they go to see the bridge or the clock.
Yeah, that's
right. The astronomical clock is beautiful.
Yeah, like in Whittington,
but just around the corner.
To see the castle. They go to see Pete's place, where the Shropshire Astronomical Society was formed.
That's right. The crazy astronomer from that little village. I just want to point out also, Stuart, in year 2000, the Independent newspaper placed you alongside Steve Hawking and the Astronomer Royal, Sir Martin Rees, as one of the stars of British astrophysics teaching. I mean, you're in good company there.
Yeah, that was. I like to think of that as 2000 BC, which is before Cox. Because Brian just knocked it out the park soon after that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't get your book on the shelves because of him in these shops, can you?
I think,
more power to him.
Absolutely.
But great, like yourself, you translate books into English or into other languages. Which is great for putting the message out there, getting the astronomy across. Brian's doing it in his way, you do it in your way, but you're putting the information out there and making it more accessible, and that's great. That's amazing.
Thank
So
you.
thank you very much.
Oh,
I think
very
Peter's
welcome.
going to go to a track in a moment. Is that right, Peter?
Yeah, in a
What have we
second.
got?
I need to ask Stuart one final question. We ask everybody this question. It's a question we asked Alan Stern. The ideal person to ask the question was Alan Stern. Pluto, not from your brain, from your heart. Planet or not?
Yeah, planet for me.
Hey, there we go.
Excellent. You're allowed to come back. Alan, I always say this. We had Alan Stern on, and he said that if you go on the Enterprise to Pluto and you look out the window, you'll see a planet. And that was his description.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go with that. Anyway, we're going to go over to a track now, folks. This is Don Airy, and this is dedicated to Stuart. It's called Shooting Star.
Good track.
There you go. You're
Okay.
Yeah.
Stuart,
Thank you very much, Stuart, for joining in
thanks,
tonight.
Stuart. Thank you. It's been great. It's been,
It's been a total pleasure. Really enjoyed talking to you.
You're always welcome anytime. Anytime we've got Reach Out and Touch Space, if your seat's on, just click on the same link, and it's always the same link. Just come in and join in the chat.
Same people.
Or if you've got to come in to promote your book. When is that book out, by the way?
This one's out now.
Is it out now?
Yeah.
Hang on, I've got to get the other 4 first.
Yeah.
And the other 13 after that.
The other 13 after that. Yeah. I've just been looking, actually, the amount of books I've got to buy now.
Tons of them. I've been buying books as we've been doing the shows.
Don't rub it in, please.
Well, have we asked Stuart what music he likes? Because I know you are a musician as well behind the scenes.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love rock music and
cool.
sort of the.
Give us some names. Give us some names.
Dave's missed out on the supergroup.
Yeah, of course.
Was Paul McCartney involved?
No. We'll fill you in on that later. Yeah, rock, metal, prog. So I love my band, if you like, was Rush and still is really.
Oh, Rush, of course, yeah.
I mean, I saw Rush over 50 times over the decades, and I just absolutely loved them.
That's called stalking now.
That's in this day and age. Well, how about you come to Solarsphere when we can get open again?
Oh, I'm so
give us a lecture and then get on stage and play some guitar.
That
would be good because we have was it Richard? He plays keyboards. Is it Richard playing the keyboards? I don't do a name check on that one. I'm just picking names out of random here. Never mind. Moving on quickly. Yeah, so Rush, one of the first singles I bought was Rush, Closer to the Heart.
Fantastic.
I'm trying to remember the B-side of that one.
I remember that. I absolutely hate Rush.
Well, I only bought it because I knew you hate it. That's why. One day I'll meet Andy and he'll hate it, so I'll get it.
First tour I went to was the Hemisphere tours.
Tour of the Hemispheres. My goodness me.
Classic. Absolutely.
What an album.
And the trees, when they did the trees and you got this projection of trees behind them and all that, absolutely amazing.
Oh, I think
Canadian
musical ambition was just, and their chops, I mean, goodness, just incredible. And how you get, I think their superpower was that they are 3 extraordinary musicians, virtuosos by any measure, and yet they're not trying to outdo each other. They're all working cohesively, for the good of the song.
Teamwork.
It's proper teamwork. I mean, God, what a band.
Do you play bass like Peter, or do you play a proper instrument?
Yeah, I play a lead. Yeah, I play 6 string.
Oh, you got 2 more strings than he's got, probably. Yeah.
Only one. Only one
works on yours, Pete.
5-string bass.
Nice.
The man strings on mine. They're not fuse wire on my guitar.
And you change your own strings, Pete.
And I can change them. Yeah, I can change my own strings.
I think you should stick with the ukulele, Pete.
I think so.
That's it. Clean them windows. Lean on your lamppost.
Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining in on the panel tonight. Thank you especially to Stuart. It's been an honour to have you here on Astro Radio.
Total pleasure, guys.
And
what's that book? Beneath the Night?
Yeah, that's the one.
That looks interesting.
I'm definitely going to get that.
Yeah, and we'll be
somehow.
We'll be back on Thursday with Stacey Downton. In the meantime, this is Hovey and Made of Stars.
It's a wrap.
And it's wrapped.
Yeah.